It's time for the Volquest podcast, where we dissect the biggest news items of the week.
Good Tuesday, everyone. Welcome to the Volquest.com podcast presented by our good friends at Smoky Mountain Organics, East Tennessee's most trusted health and wellness store focusing on natural products, organic remedies. That is Smoky Mountain Organics. Visit one of their 4 locations in Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Sevierville, their newest location in Knoxville, 8018 Kingston Pike, right across from Trader Joe's. Check them out online as well at SmokyMountainOrganics.com. Plenty to get to in this edition of the podcast. Some football news, some recruiting news, hoops recruiting news, lots of things to dive into with Austin Price and Rob Lewis. So let's jump right into them. Guys, as we broke on Monday afternoon and Tennessee released, the Volunteers will not be traveling to Provo, Utah on September the 2nd in 2023 to play that football game, which is the second part of that home-and-home series. Tennessee instead, out of that series, they will be playing Virginia in Nashville. Rob Lewis, like the move, don't like the move?
Yeah, I like it a lot for Tennessee. Now, I mean, I could see how some fans might have wanted to, go to Provo, and just because it's, so far off the traditional SEC beaten path. Really, really cool looking venue. If you paid attention, you see the mountains, and obviously a program with some tradition, even though they're not, one of the Power 5 schools. But if you're Josh Heupel, why do you want to play that game? I mean, I don't know what BYU's team is going to be like in 2 years, but tradition, as far as somebody outside the Power 5, they're traditionally one of the best programs. That would have been an enormous game for them to get an SEC school there. And I think just not a lot of upside for Tennessee to play. I mean, what's AP, better than me. What's UT's recruiting footprint like in Utah? I don't. It's not someplace they go a lot.
Minute.
And to play a game in the mid-state, I think that's always a popular move when you've got, so many alumni there, so many fans there, and arguably your biggest recruiting hotbed for this program.
You're better to Tennessee's got a better chance of finding DB Cooper in Utah than they do recruit. So I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I wouldn't hate it had they countered with Virginia and Charlottesville or whatever. I just don't like neutral site games. I don't. I feel like there's no juice there. There's a pageantry to college football, and so I love home and homes. You'll never get me to buy into a neutral site game unless it's a bowl game or the playoff or the national championship game. Sign me up for home and homes. Tennessee fans love going to Notre Dame. They love going to Cal. They love going to Oregon. They love going to UCLA, Oklahoma. You can name them over the years, Hubs. They've loved going on those trips. And in return, those fans have loved coming to Knoxville. How many times have you seen Oklahoma or whoever come to Knoxville and rave about, the atmosphere at Neyland Stadium? So, I just wish. I mean, I know this is a separate deal because it's a one-off. So we'll forgive this one going forward. Though I'd love to see Danny White get into home and homes. That's what traditionally college football is built on. Everybody started going to these neutral site season openers. That's not a fan. I'm just not a fan of it. I never will be. It is what it is.
Well, they go to those. A lot of that's about
money. I know they make more money going there. I get it.
That's that. Here's where I am. I'm not a big neutral site guy either. Okay, I'm okay with neutral site in Nashville because
it's the one-off.
That's a Tennessee home game. Okay,
yeah.
Now Charlotte's different. I'm not a big Charlotte neutral site game. Atlanta, I don't see the juice in that. But in Nashville, and hey, listen, this is if one of the marketing things here in Tennessee won't sell it this way, but you're moving to Thursday night, not helping your mid-state fan base to kick off the 22 season. A little return to favor to play in Nashville to kick off the 23 season against a Power 5 opponent. Interesting. One interesting note in that contract for the Virginia game: no ACC officials running that game. SEC officials running that game. So
and Tennessee's the home team, right?
Yes, Tennessee's a home team. So for everybody who's like, ACC officials have not been good to Tennessee, see Pittsburgh, bad spot, see bowl game multiple times. Tennessee will get SEC officials as they take on Virginia in a Power 5 matchup to start off the season September 2nd, 2023. One other stadium note for Tennessee, I know a lot of people have seen the crane and thinking that the letters are coming up and going back up on the Jumbotron on the south end. Danny White's made it clear those letters are going to return somewhere, some capacity in the stadium. But that's not what they're doing in the south end right now. What they're doing with the crane in the south end right now, as we noted on the board on Monday, is they are replacing the screen. And with the new screen coming in the north end, you want your technologies to match. Translation, you don't want Brent Hubbs' iPhone sitting next to Austin Price's iPhone and watching videos because they're very different, because Austin has the latest, greatest. Hubbs is cracked and trying to survive the day. So they're going to match the technologies up with the best technology. That way the south end picture looks the same as the north end picture. So that's what's going on with the crane there in the south end with that standpoint. Austin, we'll bounce around quite a bit here. Let's jump into a little bit of recruiting on the football side of things. Tennessee had Isaiah Shirley in on over the weekend. What do you make of that? What's this week for Tennessee in recruiting? Anything?
Well, I mean, coaches are out and about. They'll be, working Florida and Georgia, Alabama this week. For Isaiah, I mean, I think Tennessee made up some ground. How much ground? He's pretty smart. I mean, he said, look, man, I had a good time. I don't want to, judge it off this. I want to let everything settle and then see how I feel. It's just a good way to look at it. Cause I mean, everybody kind of rides that roller coaster of visit highs. And so, he was going to take, a few days, go back and kind of reassess and see where Tennessee's at. But clearly they did a good job yesterday. But is it enough? I don't know. I mean, they're a little bit late to the party in this one. And so, they've made up ground before, but they've also been buried before and not been able to dig themselves out. So, I guess time will tell whether Tennessee, which case that is for Isaiah Shirley.
Yeah, I think the big question is, will they get him back for an official visit, right? Because, I mean, I think that's going to be – and he wants to do something late summer
yes.
from a timetable standpoint. So I think to be in that they've got to get him back for an official visit. I don't think one visit is going to be enough.
No, I agree with that. He has to be back for an official.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. This week, coaches are on the road. Nothing really expected for this weekend at this point, subject to change, obviously. As we found out last week, Carnell Tate slips into town. We'll get to that in a second. And then the big one is Memorial Day weekend, Austin. And you had a list of names in the War Room last Friday. Of that list of names, it's the biggest weekend for whom? For Tennessee's standpoint.
For me, I'm going to go Vic Burley because I think Tennessee's behind. I think everybody's behind Clemson right now. And they need a big weekend with Vic Burley to kind of catch up or whatever. I just, I think that's a big weekend for him. Outside of that, I mean, I think it's a big weekend for Sean Davion Bradley. Can Tennessee can further cement themselves as a real factor in this for the long run for him. And then, kind of who else makes it in? Does Tony Mitchell make it in? I mean, he flirts back and forth, but does he really make it in? What about the receivers? Who makes it in out of that group? Aiden Mizell, this will be his first time to Knoxville. You're going to get Nathan Laycock back over from Raleigh. Of course, Nico will be here and, he works it as hard as anybody, but at the same time, I mean, kids are going to do what they want to do. So, I think it's just a big weekend in general. But, specifically, I think Vic Burley is the one you look at because you're trying to play a little bit of catch up, in my opinion, right now. And, I think that weekend will be the determining factor whether Tennessee's got a shot or not coming out of it.
Hey, AP, staying on defensive line, what about Rico Walker? How deep is Tennessee in there?
Yeah, I mean, they're in there. I mean, them in North Carolina.
He announced the top 11.
Yeah.
He just released his top 11. And
Yeah.
I'm not picking on Rico. I like him. He's a super nice kid. But, I mean, it sounds to me like AP, he's still quite a bit of ways away from sort of being anywhere. You think it's sort of two and then the other ones on the list? You think North Carolina and Tennessee kind of separated themselves from others?
Yeah, I do. I mean, not to say that, that other schools aren't in it. It just kind of feels that way to me right now. North Carolina's a school that he likes a good bit. So I think that getting him back over here so soon. He was here just about a month ago, a little less than that. I think getting him back over here in relatively quick fashion is big. Again, I think it's a big weekend for all involved, but specifically when you start talking about D-line, Tyree Weathersby, you start talking about, some of those linemen that Tennessee wants to add in this class. I think that's a big weekend for all those kids. I mean, it looks like Keldrick Falk, who everybody, who Tennessee thought was coming in, won't make it in. He's put out his top 4 now, and it's a weird top 4. Most people pegged him to kind of go to Alabama long term. They're not in the top 4. Now there's Georgia, it's Clemson, Florida State, Florida, and Auburn. And Auburn's such a dumpster fire that local kid for an Alabama kid to see just stay close to home and understand that he's probably not going to be playing for the guy that's currently recruiting him.
Yeah, interesting that's the 4 that those are the 4 you mentioned, because like you say, I mean, 3 of the 4 that you thought would be on there are not on there. So what does that one look like in another month from now? Does he take more trips at any point? Interesting. What do you make of the Carnell Tate trip this past weekend, Austin? Obviously, it's not a bad thing for Tennessee in any way, shape, or form.
No, not at all. I mean, again, he wasn't going to be able to make it in for Memorial Day weekend. He's at a 7-on-7 tournament out in L.A., which is interesting. He's going to L.A. when Nico's leaving L.A. and coming out here. But he wanted to get back in, and Tennessee honestly probably would rather him come in on a low key type weekend. I mean, sure, you can look around and go, hey, all those bodies being here kind of can help breed something, but at the same time, kids can also kind of get annoyed when like they're used to getting a certain level of attention and coaches are stretched thin. When you got 30 or 45 really big time kids in here, it can kind of get a little dicey when you're talking about spending time, because you don't want to neglect anybody. And so I think for Carnell, probably the wise move to come in and just spend one-on-one time with the coaches. Again, trending a certain way. Ohio State still feels very confident. There's a lot of talk that people around Carnell aren't crazy about Ohio State. But hey, if the kid's making his own decision, it doesn't matter what the people around him want. So, we'll see. I still think Tennessee's in a good spot here as we, get past the mid part of May and head into the latter part.
Interesting, Rob. That's an interesting balance, because the last time Carnell was in town, it was Family Day, and there was 100 people on campus. And
Casper was here too.
Yeah, a lot of people there. So then you're getting back in a month later, and it's just him. That one-on-one time has to make a big difference. So it probably is a better impact, or has a bigger impact, that he's here this past weekend as opposed to coming in Memorial Day weekend.
But I think it's a great mix of, kind of the best of both worlds. The first time he's here, no, you don't get the, the one-on-one time, but you do kind of get the notion reinforced that, Tennessee's a hot school right now. There's, a lot of kids are paying attention. A lot of kids are interested in, when you show up for one of those big weekends, you see that that's legit. I mean, a lot of guys that you've probably heard of if you're a recruit or they're on campus with you. And then, like you say, you come back and, just get all one-on-one FaceTime, the personal touch, in any kind of question, that you want answered, anything you want to see closer that maybe you didn't get to see before. I think it was a great setup for Tennessee.
Yep, not bad for sure. We'll see what it looks like for Tennessee in terms of who all comes in. We'll continue to update those names here in the next week and a half or so before everybody comes in for that select day of Junior Day that's coming up at the end of the month. I want to circle one recruiting thing back to the Virginia game in Nashville. Austin, Tennessee doesn't go head-to-head with Virginia a lot, but Tennessee has tried and has been more involved with some kids in Virginia in this recruiting cycle. How big is the state of Virginia? Not that game is going to change the tide in recruiting. I don't mean that. But how important do you think Virginia is going to be for this staff? And do you think they will continue to try to make inroads there?
Well, I mean, I think it would be smart to. I mean, traditionally, Tennessee's, recruited that state fairly well over the years. And so, I mean, it seems like they're playing up there a lot more than, they have in recent years. So when you look at, Cam Selden, when you look at, I mean, they're, still trying to get, in with Tony Rojas, although I think that ship has sailed. Cam Fleming, there's some 24s and 25s that Tennessee likes up there. So, yeah, I mean, I think that that's a state that, Tennessee needs to recruit well. And obviously they're starting to, look at that. I mean, it's hard not to think that a guy like Scott Altizer too, doesn't have an impact on on those type of thought processes, because when he was running recruiting for Tennessee years ago, Virginia was big, North Carolina was big, recruiting your footprint, and not just trying to spread yourself too thin out there. Try to stay somewhat in that circle. And it looks like Tennessee, and I get, Rojas is more way up there near DC, so that's a little bigger circle, but still Virginia is a bordering state.
Yeah, and obviously you're always balancing, what's the deal in Texas? Is that a waste of time? Why? What are you looking at in the state of Texas? I think it's always hard to go in Louisiana right now and get players with where LSU is. Obviously, Florida's there's a lot of players down there, but you got a lot of recruiting going on with a lot of schools down there, and Florida seems to be somewhat hit or miss too on why guys are leaving the state. So we'll see if Tennessee can have some success in Virginia. Again, I don't think playing Virginia has a big recruiting impact because you're not playing in that state, but we'll see if Tennessee has any more success in the state of Virginia. Speaking of success, Tennessee's basketball staff is looking for some success on the recruiting trail via the high school ranks and continuing in the transfer portal as well. Rob, 2 players in on campus, and Austin, jump in here too because you obviously visited with them. 2 players in on campus over the weekend, both from the high school ranks. What do we make of DJ Jefferson? What do we make of Tamba Awaka? And where does Tennessee with both of those guys right now?
I mean, I think Tennessee is probably the clear-cut leader for Jefferson, and I think really in the thick of it for Awaka. I think with Awaka, a lot of it's going to come down to distance. He's got some Northeast schools that stepped up and offered, in the last few weeks. And I wouldn't say Tennessee's late to the party because everybody was late to the party. I mean, he was considered a mid-major guy before his senior year, and has really turned a lot of heads. And I in talking with people, both these kids are tanks for Tennessee. They really like Awaka. Not sure how much he would help immediately next year, but they like his size. They like the way he plays. He's he's a big kid, 6'8", 245 pounds. And I'm not denigrating DJ Jefferson, but Tennessee's loaded on the wings and in the backcourt. I mean, that's a kid that, unless he's a superstar, is probably going to have to wait a year before he really gets a lot of playing time. But Awaka is a guy who could come in, and if he has a good off season, potentially help them next year. At least in 8 to 12 minute capacity with what they have coming back. But I think Tennessee's in a really good spot for Jefferson. When's AP is he deciding this end of this week?
Friday.
And Awaka still I think has some
2 3 weeks. He said 2 to 3 more weeks. He wears the goggles, Rob. Reminds me of Kevin Willis. Love it.
The Wayback Machine. And I'm trying to do some research and write something on this week, but Tennessee's done a pretty good job of adding kids late who maybe, nobody had heard of, going back to when Rick first got this job. I mean, they add Kyle Alexander late in the process, when he just got here that first spring, who turned out to have a great career. A couple years later, they added Yves Pons late, who nobody had ever heard of from France, turned out to, have a great career, be an NBA draft pick. They added Zakai, just last August, which is unheard of in this day and age. So, Olivier is another guy they added in the late period that nobody had ever heard of, who's turned out to be an SEC starter. So my point being, just because some guys are flying under the radar, I think this staff and his head coach in particular have earned, the benefit of the doubt in some of the guys that they have added who maybe nobody had ever heard of at the time, who turned out to be really, big pieces of the puzzle for him.
Rob, would you put Kevin Punter in that world?
Well, that was a Donnie Tyndall guy, though.
Okay, so he was he transferred.
I mean,
inherited
Rick
him.
certainly.
He inherited.
Rick certainly, changed
Sure,
him,
changed his
sure,
fortune, but
he was lucky to inherit him.
He inherited him. Okay, good deal. But yeah, that is a good number of guys that Tennessee has had success with late. That's still in it. It's trying to be in it for Tyrese Hunter, although a lot of people think Texas may have surged forward there with that one. we'll see, Rob.
And is the Kansas visit still on this week? I can't find a clear-cut answer.
Well, I think it depends on if they've got room or not, and if Bill Self's going to make room. Now, I mean, somebody told me that Tyrese Hunter is a good enough transfer and a good enough player that Bill Self would make room.
Yeah, I have heard the same thing.
But so if he go ahead.
I was just going to say I've heard the same thing, but I think it's different. I think it's easy to say that, but is a kid really going to go ahead and take that visit when there's not room and just trust that, hey, there's going to be room? I mean, I think that's two different things.
Yeah. And how hard is Bill Self going to push to make room on a returning player, from a national championship team, from a year ago as well. So if the Kansas visit happens, I think Kansas, is certainly a big factor there. I'm a little surprised there's no Gonzaga chatter from him, that it seems to be more Texas and Tennessee right now, depending on what happens with Kansas. But we'll have to see. Outside of that, Rob, I think the transfer market seems to be closing down pretty quick. I think if you're looking for more bodies, aren't you now really looking at the international world and seeing who's out there?
Yeah, that's what I think. I mean, I think if any new name that we hear besides those three, I think will be one that will be phonetically difficult to pronounce, and we'll have to lean on AP.
Sledmedev Petrovic. Let's do it.
So we'll keep you up to date on what's going on in the hoops recruiting world, and obviously DJ Jefferson looks like the next scheduled guy to make a decision here, unless Hunter was to do something. So we'll see what happens with Jefferson at the end of the week. A couple of big picture story things out there I want to run by you guys and kind of get your thoughts on as well. I don't know if you saw Kurt Herbstreit's comments over the weekend about NIL. One of his comments was that he sees a time moving forward where student athletes will get a slice of the TV money to some degree, meaning the university is going to write student athletes a check, not necessarily an NIL deal, but they will write a check from the university. That's something that's on the table for discussion with the transformation committee that Greg Sankey's a part of. Of course, we know the case with the Alston money. The student athletes right now are getting about $6,000 a year just to be student athletes, essentially, as a part of that case ruling. Do you guys see a time where student athletes could get a slice of a network TV deal? And if so, is that the final separator from the Power Fives from the rest, the full breakaway? Rob, I'll start with you. Is that?
I mean, I think yes.
MTSU is not going to have the money to pay out of a TV contract.
Yeah, I think yes to both questions, and I think not only, maybe MTSU, but I mean,
Memphis.
Yeah, I mean, at what point does that go away? I mean, and I guess the Vanderbilts and Iowa States of the world will be able to tread water because they're on the coattails of Alabama, Michigan, Georgia, Ohio State in their conferences. But I think the haves and have-nots, the Power Fives, I think the gap is going to widen, and I am all in favor of kids getting a slice of that money. I mean, you're not. I don't care how big of a Clemson fan you are. You're not watching 7:00 ESPN to see what Dabo does on the sidelines. You're watching to see what Trevor Lawrence does, or Deshaun Watson, or T. Higgins, or same for any school. I mean, these kids for years and years. I mean, they're the show. They're the attraction. I am all in favor.
The question,
slice of the pie.
The question for me is though, what's the percentage? What's the percentage? And whatever the percentage is, I'm sure that there's going to be athletes that and lawyers that say it's not enough. It's not enough, and then there's another court battle. I mean, like the problem is now is like these kids, they get their money through NIL and they spend it quick as they can get it. And then guess what? They want more.
Well, everybody
they want more.
That's not just kids. That's most every red-blooded American.
I know, but I mean, like kids are more negligent. I mean, like most of these kids, not all of them, but most of these kids are, first time they're getting some semblance of money in some ways, and they just roll right through it. And again, I think when you look at just these TV contracts, what's going to be the accurate percentage? Because I mean, these contracts are huge. I mean, 10% of it is a huge chunk of money.
Enormous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would be a small percentage. And remember, you're also paying every student athlete. It's not just the football players and basketball players, who would be getting that if you ever get to that point. My point with it is, I'm with Rob. I think at some point that's transformation committee is going to put enough thoughts or enough things out there that's going to create that true separation of the Power Five schools, and then who runs what and how does all that take place, I think is going to be interesting. The other NIL thing that's interesting, and this came out on Monday, is that the University of Virginia has struck a deal to allow its athletes to profit off NIL by using the school's logo, which to me is a monumental. I mean, I can't imagine many schools are going to follow that suit or want to follow that suit, and that may end up in court to follow that. But that's a major change from a corporate. Let's look at corporate advertising for the university, right? I mean, a guy can wear an orange shirt, no power T on it, and can represent for himself whatever company he wants to represent out there.
Just go off the bank. We'll say Regions Bank.
Right. Okay, so if Hendon Hooker did a Regions Bank spot or billboard or whatever as of now, he could wear an orange shirt, but no T, because Tennessee has a corporate sponsorship with a bank in First Horizon Bank. Now that blurs that lines dramatically if guys are going to be able to wear logos to represent competing companies. I think this one from the standpoint of universities this is the one that's perplexing to them. They do not want a bunch of schools to follow Virginia's path here, in my opinion. That's my initial thought just after seeing it hit.
Intellectual property rights. That's going to be the phrase you hear a lot. And because right now, all of those sponsors, those corporate sponsors you're talking about, have the intellectual property rights of Tennessee, which means inside the stadium and the logos. So, like, Zakai Ziegler can't go in and do a photo shoot inside Thompson-Boling Arena. And if he does do it outside, he can't wear a tee.
So pretty significant move, in my opinion. That's a pretty significant decision or deal that's been.
I totally agree with you.
I know Virginia's not necessarily been the biggest player out there in the NIL world from most people's viewpoints, what they're talking about, but I can promise you, every school in the country saw that news and went, whoa, wait, let's look at this.
Because we all know, without mentioning names, there were some, university affiliates that got sideways with some student athletes this year for post-game product placement. That's a slippery slope. It's only going to get slicker.
Yep, it's certainly that. As the NIL world continues to change every single day, it seems like every single hour almost. So something new in the NIL world. We'll see what dives out from that. We've got plenty of things up at Volquest.com. Obviously, we had a story on Monday about the change in venue and the change the game. We'll have some things from Tennessee's administration and Danny White coming up here in the next few days as well. Plenty of recruiting news, plenty of baseball things out there. Lots and lots going on right now at Volquest.com. That's going to do it for this Tuesday edition of the Volquest.com podcast presented by our good friends at Smoky Mountain Organics. For Rob Lewis and Austin Price, I'm Brent Hubbs. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, everybody.
You've been listening to the Volquest podcast every week here on Volquest.